Tito Colliander has 4 different chapters on prayer, but I'll start just by reading his first. Well, no, they're short. Prayer is your first and incomparably most important means of fighting. Learn to pray, and you vanquish all the evil powers that could imaginably assail you. Prayer is one wing, faith the other, that lifts us heavenward. With only one wing no one can fly. Prayer without faith is as meaningless as faith without prayer. But if your faith is very weak, you can profitably cry, Lord, give me faith. Such a prayer seldom goes unheard. The grain of mustard seed, says the Lord, grows into a great tree. The person who wants sunshine and air opens the window. It would be folly to sit behind drawn curtains and say there is no light, there isn't a breath of air. Let this picture show you clearly how prayer works. God's power, or grace, is always and everywhere accessible to all, but one cannot get one's share of it without wanting it and acting accordingly. Prayer is action. To pray is to be highly effective. For every kind of effectiveness needs practice. It is by speaking a foreign language that one learns it, and by praying one learns to pray. Without prayer, you can never expect to find what you are seeking. Prayer is the beginning and the basis of all striving towards God. The first gleam of light is lit by prayer. Prayer gives the first hints of what you are seeking, and it awakens and sustains the desire to go further. Prayer is the foundation of the world, St. John Climacus has said, and another saint has likened the universe to a bowl in which the Church of Christ rests, but the Church is held together by prayer. Prayer is humanity's intercourse and encounter with God. It is the bridge on which one crosses over from his carnal self with its temptations to the spiritual with its freedom. It is a wall of defense against troubles, a weapon against doubt. It annihilates affliction and bridles anger. Prayer is food for the soul and light for the mind. It bears in the present the joy that is to come. For him who truly prays, prayer is the verdict, the tribunal, and the judge's throne, not waiting for the last judgment, but now, in the next moment, in the heart. Prayer and watchfulness are one and the same, for it is with prayer that you stand at the gate of your heart. The watchful eye reacts immediately to the slightest shifting in the field of vision. So also does the heart that is steadfast in prayer. To leave off praying is the same thing as deserting one's post. The gate stands open for the ravaging hordes, and the treasures one has gathered are plundered. The plunderer does not need long to accomplish his work. Anger, for example, can destroy everything in a single second. From the foregoing, we understand that by prayer the Holy Fathers are not referring to occasional prayer, morning and evening devotions at grace at meals, but for them, prayer is synonymous with unceasing prayer, the life of prayer. Pray without ceasing, 1 Thessalonians 5:17, is to be taken as a literal command. Understood in this way, prayer is the science of scientists and the art of artists. The artist works in clay or colors, in word or tones. According to his ability, he gives them pregnancy and beauty. The working material of the praying person is living humanity. By his prayer, he shapes it, gives it pregnancy and beauty, first himself and thereby many others. The man of science studies created things and appearances. The man of prayer presses through to the creator of created things. It is not warmth that induces his love, but the wellspring of warmth, not the functions of life, but the origin of life, not his own ego, but the source of consciousness in an ego, the creator of it. The artist and the scientist must put in much labor and toil before they reach maturity. The skill they desire they never attain. If they were to wait for divine inspiration every time they go to work, they would never learn the principles of their profession. The violinist must practice perseveringly in order to be initiated into the secrets of his sensitive instrument. How much more sensitive is the human heart? Draw nigh to God, and he will draw nigh to you. It is for us to begin. If we take one step towards the Lord, he takes 10 towards us. He who saw the prodigal son while he was yet at a distance, and had compassion, and ran and embraced him. Sometime you must take the first uncertain steps if you wish at all to draw near to God. Do not be anxious about your clumsy beginning. Do not yield to shyness and uncertainty and the mocking laughter of enemies who try to persuade you that you are behaving ridiculously and that the whole thing is only a child of fantasy and meaningless. Know that there is nothing the enemy fears like prayer. The child's desire to read increases as he learns to read. The further one gets into a language, the better he speaks it and the more he likes it. Enjoyment increases with proficiency. Proficiency comes with practice. Practice becomes more pleasant as proficiency increases. Do not suppose that it is otherwise with prayer. Do not wait for some extraordinary divine inspiration before setting to work. Man is created for prayer, just as he is created to speak and to think, but especially for prayer. For the Lord God put man into the Garden of Eden to dress it and to keep it. Genesis 2:15. And where will you find the Garden of Eden if not in your heart? Like Adam, you ought to weep for the Eden of which you were deprived because of your incontinence. You were clad in fig leaves and garments of skin. Genesis 3:21. That is your perishable substance with its suffering. Between you and the narrow way to the tree of life lay the dark flames of earthly desires, and only to him who conquers these desires will it be given to eat of the tree of life, which is in the midst of the paradise of God. Revelation 2:7. How hard it is to win such a victory. Adam broke only one of the Lord's commandments. Daily and hourly you break them all, says St. Andrew of Crete. From your position as a hardened, constant criminal, your prayer must go forth in order to reach the heights. The hardened criminal often is not conscious of his guilt. He is hardened. So it is with us. Do not let yourself be frightened by the hardness of your own heart. Prayer will gradually soften it.
It's done it again, so I get a bit so anti-Korean.
Yes.
With the violinist, you see, he compares, why don't you be a violinist? How many violinists are there amongst the people who play the violin? A few.
Well,
that you could say, how many people pray, like there are few monks, holy monks somewhere. So why does he use something like that for us? I think he just doesn't really know what's he doing.
I was thinking about that because coming from a family where the children all play musical instruments, one watches and sees certain things. And I think that virtuoso musicians agree that whereas there has to be, in the first place, a natural inclination towards wanting to play, what really makes the difference between a virtuoso musician and somebody who can just play out a few tunes is practice, nothing more and nothing less. I have a friend who actually is an Orthodox priest, but apart from being an Orthodox priest, he's a famous pianist. He was a famous pianist before he was a priest, and is world class. Tours and gives concerts when he's not serving. And what's interesting is he can't sing a note. He doesn't seem to me to have any particular musical sense. And in the services, in the liturgy, he doesn't take the note that the choir is singing, and he doesn't give a note that the choir can pick up, and it's not a very satisfactory musical experience. But with the piano, he's reached the top of his game. And I think that in that respect, what Colliander is saying does bear true. Of course, the difference here is whether we are ourselves aiming to be a virtuoso prayer, or whether we're simply, trying to stand on our own 2 feet. I think some of the other examples he gives are probably more helpful. I would add another example to this when it comes to prayer, which is physical fitness, or not, one sees and one is inspired by great athletes and gymnasts. It's wonderful to watch on the TV figure skating or gymnastics on an Olympic scale, all these people who can do, triple and pole vaulting and decathlon and all of these things. And in order for them to get to that standard, they have to devote their whole life to it. For me, I suppose what is important is that I can walk and be mobile and not be out of breath if I run up the stairs. And I suppose that in terms of our prayer, we are looking at a difference between the great ascetics, who are the spiritual athletes. They're even called, in the church's tradition, the spiritual athletes, and ourselves, who are just aiming in the first place to be healthy in regard to prayer. I think there's another thing here as well, which relates to the question, what is prayer? Tito Colliander is seeing prayer here specifically in terms of part of an ascetic labour. But one might want to look at prayer in a rather more basic level and a rather more human level, simply in terms of communion with God. I mean, at the end of the day, what is prayer? I'm asking you the question. What do you think prayer is?
Well, I thought it's interesting between what Tito Colliander was saying about the almost permanent vigilance he advocates, and then the fact if we that he distinguishes this from very conscious, very formal acts of prayer, saying it's something that's supposed to be continuously ongoing. Metropolitan Anthony, I think, talks about this being in the now, where he says it's almost a state of mind where a part of him is continuously submerged in prayer, and that gives him the strength to be in a situation. I thought that is perhaps similar, that if you train to a certain degree in whatever it is, it becomes part of what you do every day. It sort of finds its way in even mundane things that are very, very far away from the high-intensity training that you might undertake.
Yes. St. Paul says, pray without ceasing, but he does not say prayers without ceasing. And there's quite a different thing, isn't it? A state of being.
If it's a ceaseless prayer, it's a state of being almost. And everything you do, I know Metropolitan Anthony used to say that, whatever you do, if you do it with Christ in mind, sweeping the floor, ironing, whatever, and you are actually not necessarily daydreaming, but focusing on God, or doing it to the glory of God, then you are doing it and you are in communion with.
But do we do that?
No.
That's the thing, because I know that I can sustain that for a while, and then it goes.
Yes.
And I suppose that also then ties back into this ascetic and contemplative life. I have met people who I honestly believe were living in that sort of state, for whom the difference between prayer and life had been eradicated. Another thing that I notice when it comes to prayer is that different types of prayer appeal to different types of people. And I don't believe that God has a score sheet for the type of prayer that we are offering him, you know. I mentioned figure skating a minute ago, and I know that in figure skating the adjudicators are all sitting there ticking off the different skills that it's necessary to demonstrate. But I don't believe that God does that with prayer. And I find that certain people approach God in prayer in ways which others don't find so easy. And I think that some of this is also culturally informed and also has a lot to do with upbringing, either from our parents or from our spiritual parents who were there for us when we came into the church. I'll give you an example. Liturgical prayer, the prayer of the church's services. For some people, this is as easy as breathing. For me, when I'm in church, in the services, I don't find it difficult most of the time. Of course, there are times when there are distractions and there are hot weather and one just wishes that one was sitting under an air conditioning machine or whatever. But on the whole, I don't find being in church oppressive or difficult. I find rather that it gives me a peace and that it gives me new energy. That's not a very good word, but you know what I mean. It gives me, it refreshes me. I know that for myself, frequently, especially on Saturday evenings, if I've been celebrating the liturgy somewhere else in the country, I get home and realise I have 5 minutes to be in church, and I think to myself, I really wish I didn't have to go, I'm tired. But I know that by the end of the vigil service, something will have happened that will have refreshed me, and I will have entered into the prayer, sometimes passively and sometimes actively, but something happens in that process. On the other hand, I know other people who find liturgical prayer extremely difficult, boring, incomprehensible, unnecessary, or yes. I wonder whether this is because there is a failure to move from the external into the internal and to unite them, because obviously this is what our liturgical prayer is supposed to do. But it only does it if we open ourselves to it, if we put up a barrier the moment that we walk in to the church, it won't help.
Well, this is like bringing one of the enemies in with you, isn't it? You know, when he's talking about it, the whole thing started with it's for fighting, prayer is for fighting. And the enemies are exactly what you're saying. Oh, this is boring, or this is whatever, or the distractions and so on. This is all the enemies that one has to deal with. But it's taken me a very long time since I started in the church, about 16 years ago, to find out, and one is still finding out about prayer. I don't think it's something you can say, oh, I know how to pray. You can't do that, because it's an ongoing process and it takes many different forms. But one thing I do think is something that is important is that part of our care for our own souls is prayer, because the souls need to be nurtured, and prayer does that. Prayer gives something to our souls that is absolutely vital.
Prayer is food.
Prayer is food.
It is.
Everything feeds on something, and our souls need to be fed. And there's nothing. Well, I have found it so much easier to pray, whether it's liturgical or on my own, since understanding that this is because I have a soul that needs caring for. Otherwise, everything's happening within the ego. And prayer is very limited there. You have to have your whole person involved.
Interesting what you say about bringing one of the enemies in with you. You know that in the liturgy, before the creed and the Eucharistic prayer, when the deacon says, the doors, in wisdom let us attend. And you know that these words come originally from the time when the doors of the church were closed, so that only those who were baptized could participate in the communion. And at various points in more recent church history, there have been people who said, oh, well, this is unnecessary for us now. We should perhaps omit these words like the litanies for the catechumens because they belong to a different age. But one liturgical commentator, I can't remember who, says, these words remind us that at this point we need to guard the doors of our own hearts, precisely with this in mind, you know, so that we must put out from the temple of our heart all of the things that shouldn't belong there any longer. And that's a very important aspect of prayer,